Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video, and in this one I just want to talk about some of the stuff that came out of D23, mainly like the Kenobi announcement, Mandalorian trailer, and also the sort of teaser trailer for Rise of Skywalker. I haven't talked about Star Wars in a while on the channel, so I'll just make a general update on kind of where I'm at with Star Wars, including some of my thoughts as we head into Episode 9. So, I suppose let's start off with just the Kenobi announcement. That's probably been the thing that's got the most excitement, I think, even beyond the trailers for the other two things. The thing that was literally just announced, and here is the actor attached to it, Ewan McGregor is coming back, that got all of the excitement in the lead up to it, and even the aftermath, because I think you're really noticing Star Wars as it is right now, people wanting very specific things, and actually a lot of it being kind of prequel stuff. And it's been so interesting to see Disney go so far away from prequel stuff, and it seems like they're kind of getting back on board with it now, because I suppose up until like a few months ago, like the only thing that I think had a lot of Star Wars fans really excited was the Clone Wars coming back. And so then like the new game, was it Jedi Fallen Order, that has people excited because it's sort of set between prequel and original trilogy and stuff like that. Now they're doing the Kenobi one that we wanted in the first place, in that obviously after Solo, Disney made some big changes, and ultimately probably for the negative, to only focus on the main Sequel Trilogy, which was the thing that people had the problem with in the first place. I think Solo ended up just being this kind of movie that just got kind of caught in the crossfire, because I still maintain that I think Solo was actually a really good movie. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I'd love to see more Star Wars movies like that one, including a potentially Kenobi one. But I actually do think that Kenobi being a series is probably a better thing. It's going to allow for more time, more focus, and ultimately will work better as a series, in that if you do a movie, I think you have to try and amplify everything and make it huge and as big as possible, when more than likely the story that we're going to get isn't going to be that huge, that big, that impactful, because of where it's going to be set. But there's interest because just Obi-Wan on Tatooine kind of monitoring things, and maybe when he has time clearing up some other stuff, maybe a little bit off-world. That's still a really, really good idea, because like there was that book that came out towards the end of the old EU of Obi-Wan and Tatooine, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I could maybe understand why it maybe just straight up adapting that wouldn't quite work, but something along those lines. Plus you can always incorporate some of the stuff that you've already set up that's still out there, and that Maul is still out there. Now we ultimately have seen where Maul meets his end in Rebels, and it happens a good bit later on, but I could see setting up a little bit more on that, because of course the new Clone Wars episodes are going to focus on Maul a little bit more. We already know where he ends up, so Obi-Wan having a little bit more focus there could be something interesting. But I was just so impressed watching that video, of seeing the excitement of Ewan McGregor finally being confirmed to be on board with this project. Of just it's finally happening. That Disney seemed to have finally begun to make some good decisions with Star Wars, I suppose, going forward. Because look at the excitement level for that, which was just announced, versus the other Solo character series, the Cassian Andor series that they also confirmed. I don't know if they revealed more information on it, but I think the actor was there, and there's just not a lot of excitement about that one, in that I think there's still potential on that one, just with the idea of a Rebel, original trilogy kind of Rebel focused series. It has some interest. I don't know necessarily about him as the main character and focusing a full series on him, but what Rogue One did was present a slightly more sort of gritty view of the war between the Empire and the Rebellion, and Cassian Andor was kind of the character at the forefront of that. So, that could present an interesting kind of tonal look at what's going on in an otherwise war that I don't find all that interesting. I think the Clone Wars is definitely one of the most interesting conflicts in all of Star Wars, whereas I think the Rebellion versus the Empire, and now as we have right now in the Sequel Trilogy, the Resistance versus the First Order, it's not as interesting. I find it much more interesting when it is more sort of even versus even, rather than just like, you know, the rebels, you know, those plucky rebels defending against the bigger empire or first order. In that, like, I think there's a way to do it that's much better, that creates impact around it. But I think Star Wars has sort of struggled to do that with the Rebellion, to make it all that interesting. All of Star Wars Rebels, I think, was trying to do that, and I think Rebels highlighted that in general, just the formation of that faction isn't as interesting as you necessarily think it is. And I think just the Clone Wars having the, you know, clone army plus the Jedi versus the droid army and all this kind of politic, kind of crazy stuff going on in the background is ultimately a more interesting kind of premise. So those two series were it was interesting to see just the contrast between the one getting barely any attention, and then one, despite having barely any information, just the initial announcement is like the most popular thing ever. So that's really cool to see, and I hope Disney note that going forward, that the Kenobi announcement got a huge reception, whereas they haven't maybe been getting that for a while. Then The Mandalorian got its trailer, and I ultimately don't think there's too much to say about it. I think it looks solid. I'm going to give it a chance when the new, Disney streaming service, whatever it's called, Disney Plus, comes out. It looks like Star Wars. I was impressed with like the seeming like CG or use of kind of models with some CG that they used there. It seemed like there was much more going on than I expected with the amount of sort of ship focused stuff going on there. There was a decent amount of aliens in terms of recognizable aliens, which the movies haven't really been doing. And yeah, just like a bounty hunter focus. I think that could work really well as a series. Obviously, I think it's going to take getting into that first episode in depth to get, okay, here's where we are, this is what we're doing right now. It's just kind of like bounty hunter, slightly gritty, some Star Wars action in space, some Star Wars action on the ground. That's really about all you get from the trailer, but I'm interested enough. I was sort of sold on it from the little bits they announced early on, and this is just like, yeah, I'll definitely give it a chance. So then we move into Rise of Skywalker stuff, and there's been obviously the rumor mill's been in full force for this movie for a while now, and there's been so many, this is what happens, oh wait, this is what happens, here's the spoilers I heard, here's the spoilers you heard, and it seems like some of them are proving to be correct. Like a lot of the stuff about C-3PO looks like it's going to actually become true, with the little bit of a visual we got there of 3PO with the red eyes. It seems like he's going to go through some sort of a memory bank type thing where his personality changes. It'll probably be very similar to what they did with him in like Attack of the Clones during that sequence, except maybe treated a little bit more seriously. But yeah, the trailer itself, I actually like that it started off by reflecting on the previous, 8 films, including all of the original trilogy and all of the prequel trilogy, and that they've been talking about this movie as like the end of the Skywalker saga, and it's never felt like that. I think a lot of people are noticing just a huge disconnect between like the new trilogy and like everything else that's come before. And so it's felt so weird when they announced 9 as like, this is the movie that's going to end everything. It's going to bring everything together and end the story focusing on Skywalkers. And like, how, based on what it's done? So it was interesting to see it use like prequel footage. Like I was shocked to see like what's this? A Phantom Menace clip in a trailer for a new Star Wars thing? What's going on here? And probably even more than that, like Attack of the Clones clip, like they never show clips of that in like things. It seems like it's that movie of all of them that almost tends to be forgotten the most, and it was so interesting to see it be used. But it looks like at the very least Episode 9 is going to attempt to try to create a through line throughout all of the trilogies. Like the original prequels, like, say what you will about the prequels, I really like them. They're my favorites, personally. They've always flowed well together. The prequels have always been, for me, a very good setup for the originals, in that it's always worked well as a prequel. The sequels have just felt like all over the place so far with 7 and 8. 9 has so much work to do. It has a lot of work to do to try and do any of that stuff, because ultimately my thoughts going in are that I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to hope and expect that they can do something after all the backlash after Episode 8 and some of the backlash that Episode 7 suffered, that they're going to realize, okay, we actually have to deliver here, and we're going to do something big, impactful, it's going to respect everything that's come before, and that they're going to try and do something. I think they've done enough to make it clear that just with the introduction of Palpatine, some of the teases from this trailer, that they're committing to doing some big stuff. This won't be a cookie cutter movie that doesn't have anything that happens. It's going to try to bridge the gap, and I just wonder how exactly it's going to try to accomplish to do that. In terms of, like, how is the sequel trilogy going to reference the prequels all that much? In that, like, the way I would be thinking about it now is that, like, you kind of have to almost go Plagueis right now. You have to really address that Palpatine learned from his master certain techniques that we didn't see over the course of the prequels or the originals. He uses them in death, and that's how he sort of persists up to now. They're going to have to, I think, bring, like, the focus on the Chosen One's story, the Skywalkers, what the Chosen One actually is, who is the Chosen One. They're going to have to bring that, you know, fully forward, basically. Cover a lot of the stuff, like, I think, like, I can see them referencing Plagueis at some point. I think that's probably this, like, open thread from the prequels that you kind of have to somehow bring full circle in some way. And whether or not they'll directly do it, I'm not sure, but you have to come up with some sort of solution like that, because they've already done the Sith survives by, like, force of anger. Like, that's how Darth Maul survived being cut in half and is alive in, like, the Clone Wars up until his death in Rebels. They got across the idea that through the dark side and focusing on his anger and rage at taking revenge against Obi-Wan, that's how he survived. I could see them doing something like that with Palpatine, plus the fact that his master was Plagueis, who was midichlorian, experimenting focused. He found some way to stay alive in the Force, whether that be some sort of a Force ghost or just persisting in some form attached to the remains of the Death Star, which seems to be a important place going into this movie. I think they'll find some way to do that. The question with Palpatine is ultimately, like, okay, great, you're finally bringing in a villain that I think people care about, but you have to bring him back and give a good explanation for, one, why he's back, and two, what he's trying to accomplish in this era and how, in a way, up to date he is with everything that's going on here. In that, does he know about Kylo? Does he know about Rey? What does he know about Rey and Kylo and all that sort of stuff? Because in all of this, it's kind of like, what on earth was Snoke? Like, well, what was the point of Snoke for, like, episode 7 and 8 when Palpatine's just going to be introduced in 9? And this is where, like, you really have to explain that in some way. Like, what is the First Order? Those questions that, like, I think some of the books, some of the more boring books that have come out have attempted to, like, explain. Like, can we get an explanation within the movies for any of that stuff? Because it still feels weird that, like, what we've done effectively over the course of 7 and 8 is just, we start off with the Resistance and the First Order, and we've effectively, but I suppose by episode 9 we're effectively just going back to the Resistance. At the end of episode 8 is the Rebellion again, and with Palpatine and, like, Star Destroyer stuff here, it seems like the First Order is basically just back to being the Empire. We just completely reset everything. Luke at the end of episode 6 was bringing back the Jedis, so we just set that in the sequel era by also, the Jedi have been wiped out again. Like, you can see where the frustration is here of, like, what are they trying to do with these movies? Are they trying to remove themselves from the past, or are they trying to reference the past? It's the end of the Skywalker saga, so they have to be referential. But then the tagline of, like, episode, like, 7 and 8 is, like, let the past die, kill it if you have to. And then the movies themselves are just this mismatch of, like, it's all new, but wait, we have to be referential to this. We have to do this, but we can't do that. And that, like, for the most part, all of the ships are super referential. Like, it's all just slightly altered versions of, like, X-Wings and TIE Fighters. So they haven't really attempted to do all that much crazy stuff with regards to, like, the sort of technology, like the lightsaber. Like, it looks like Rey repairing the lightsaber is not going to result in any significant redesign to it. It's just, she repaired it. It's back in half. There's, like, a piece of material in the middle that brings the Luke Anakin lightsaber back together. And it's not really her own. It's just the same weapon. All the vehicles are the same. But then pretty much all of the creatures, all of the alien species, are brand new ones, and there's not really many references to any of the species we've seen before. Same for the most part with a lot of the planets. They're not really being overly referential to places we've been before. And then the same ultimately you would have to say with the characters, which again is this mismatch of like, episode 7 was fairly okay with it, and people I think could accept killing off Han because of the story it was trying to create, what it did for Kylo going forward. But then the way they handled Luke was such a problem, and I agree that I still hate the way that they did Luke in episode 8, and I hope they find some way to fix that in episode 9 somehow. And it just felt like, wow, 8 just didn't respect the past at all. In a trilogy that is ultimately getting to 9 and it's trying to bring everything together, yet all we have is to go on is like, Han's dead, Luke's dead but can come back as a Force ghost if you have to. So we're left with Leia, but Carrie Fisher died, so they have had to sort of mismatch scenes of her before together to use her, and likely they'll have to find some way to kill the character off in some way in this movie. And it just feels like a lot of people wanted, like, how could you have done this? Like, you started off this trilogy with those 3 actors alive and signed on, and you never once had a scene with all 3 of them together. It will always be, I think it will probably go down in history as like one of these like biggest missed opportunities in any sort of like kind of cinema history of like, they had it and they never decided to bring the characters back together again. Like, what were they, thinking in a way? And especially 8 with what it did, and having a lot of the, I suppose for most fans' minds, a lot of the important plot character stuff happen off screen. It's still so confusing to think about that, like the whole Luke being the way he is, what happened with him and Ben, it's just told in like this like 10-second like flashback sequence, and that's all that there really is. And like, that's what you want to know about. You want to know what made Kylo go from being the child of Han and Leia to being this character that he is here. I'm still invested in Kylo and Rey. I think they're really like the only 2 characters I think I really properly care about in the sequel era. I really do not care that much about Finn. I think that's just where I'm at right now with the sequels. Poe, Finn, Rose, these other characters that are in the series, I just don't think there's all that much to them. In the end, like, Poe is just the pilot character. We'll see if they try and create a better dynamic between them now that they're probably going to have the 3 main characters together for pretty much the first time outside of like a scene at the end of episode 8. Like, what is the dynamic between Poe, Finn, and Rey actually going to be? Plus all these other characters, and that, like, again, you don't seem to, the past doesn't matter, but you're bringing Lando back for this one. What's that about? Yet you didn't bring him back in the other ones when it would have been more like appreciated, would have fit better, and so on. Similarly, stuff like the Millennium Falcon still like being the central ship, like that is the main like flagship in a way of the series. Like, they're relying on the past for so many things, but then not for other things. Like, they're careful of not being overly referential, but then they are overly referential in other ways, and it remains so weird that to me that the central things are the Luke Anakin lightsaber, the Millennium Falcon, and the ships. The technology is almost the thing that should change the most. The thing that changed the most between the prequels and the originals is the thing that has like changed the least between the originals and the sequels. It's just this sort of mess of contradictions, and it ultimately, to me, speaks to the main problem with the sequel trilogy being just a lack of planning. By all accounts, these movies were made just completely separately from each other. Like, there was no real, we know what's going to happen in episode 9 where we're starting off with episode 7. I really don't get that impression from these movies, like, at all. Episode 7 was such a by the numbers, just standard movie. It was just, it did what it had to do. It kind of got people invested, but in the end it ultimately didn't do all that much. There wasn't that much of a plot to episode 7 in the grand scheme of things. It was just like, okay, we've taken out this newly established republic that we didn't really focus on at all, so the resistance as we knew them is actually the resistance. It's the main fighting force. The First Order suddenly comes back. Rey is special in some way. Kylo is the child of Han and Leia. That was really what all it did. It just introduced those basic ideas. Then 8 kind of comes in and is just like, plot-wise, it does the least of like kind of almost all of the Star Wars movies, in that the main plot of that movie is like the slowest chase scene ever. It's just those two ships, you know, doing that battle across the whole thing, while people kind of come in and out and come and go, and you're cutting back to Luke and Rey doing the training and kind of being frustrated with what they're doing with Luke, and they're and all the time the movie that's making such slow progress is also the one that is making the decisions that frustrate people the most. Oh yeah, it doesn't matter who Snoke is, we just killed him. It doesn't matter really about the context for who Luke is and why he is the way he is and stuff like that. All those stories just being told off screen, not utilizing Luke well once he comes back, all to just get back to the idea of the Resistance is now the Rebellion again. And you know, it just feels so weird in that, like, I'm invested in the Jedi characters because I think there's some potential with like Chosen One stuff and Skywalker lineage stuff. I really don't care about the main like conflict that's going on as such, because the movie's not done a good job at all about giving me, I suppose, that world building aspect of what's going on, in that you have to basically look into extra material to realize that, like, okay, the Republic was taken out because Hosnian Prime was the new center of the Republic, and that's where all the like politicians were, so that planet being destroyed plus the surrounding ones took out most of the leadership. Okay, that's fine. Whereas, say what you will about the prequels, they at least tell you what's going on. Like, you can understand the idea of that blockade in episode 1 and what it was trying to accomplish, and it being the start of Palpatine's plan, and you track that through episode 2 with the emergency powers and stuff like that, and in episode 3 it all coming together. Obviously the originals, a lot of the political complexity is taken out of things because it's meant to just be the very standard, you know, good versus evil, and you know exactly what's what. It's simple storytelling, but it's good simple storytelling. Whereas the sequels have always been like trying to blend the two together, take away some of the complexity, but then it doesn't work unless it has some of that complexity, and it's just all over the place of like, we don't have enough information to get invested here. And you think it's as simple as it was in the original trilogy, but it's not. And that speaks to, like, I suppose in 7 and 8, just them being so kind of almost anti-prequel that they're forgetting about it. And now, where's most of their sort of new product, new announcement success coming from? It's Clone Wars is coming back. People really want that, and I assume after it probably will be very successful, there'll be people kind of wanting more of that, focus on that. Where's Ahsoka next? Where's the continuation of her story? The Kenobi thing got huge focus. The new game, focusing on the kind of prequel thing with the aftermath of Order 66, has people invested. And I think people want to know more about that sort of stuff. People really like Qui-Gon. They want to know more about Qui-Gon, and I assume he will be a central part of, like, you can't do this Kenobi thing without Qui-Gon, and like Obi-Wan like training with Yoda and Qui-Gon sort of through the Force to learn how to become a Force ghost. That sort of thing will be what people will be wanting, and it all stems ultimately kind of from some setup stuff from the prequels. And that's what's been so interesting for me with Star Wars in this new era, where especially episode 8 has sort of split the fandom in two. And what's happened is that because there's been so much like anger towards Star Wars as it is right now, the new stuff, it makes the sort of dislike of the prequels seem so tame in comparison. And you've seen, I think, people who sort of dislike the prequels actually be like, wait, compared to what we have right now, the prequels are like amazing. And as someone who's always liked the prequels, like I think what stands out here in all of this is that the prequels, where the prequels struggle is sort of like the quality of like acting in a way, like probably isn't the best. Like the new stuff is, I think, acted better, but the content that is actually covered over the course of those movies, the prequels, is so much more interesting and like thoughtful than the content that is happening in the sequel trilogy. You can tell that like you've seen the documentaries, like George Lucas put so much time and effort into making the prequels versus look, time and effort is going into making the sequels, but it's like JJ on the first one, then it's Ryan Johnson on the second one. Now JJ's been brought back in because no one liked episode 8. Disney changed all of their plans basically in the aftermath of episode 8, and Solo not doing as well as a sort of like result of episode 8 being as it was. When in reality they sort of course corrected on Solo when they should have course corrected on the reaction to 8. And it just feels like, you know, you have Star Wars in this terrible position in a way at this point in time, where like you're into articles about like Galaxy's Edge is like this failure and stuff like that, and is that people like over exaggerating stuff, but the idea is just that like, look, it hasn't fully opened yet. They're doing this sort of limited launch at the start, but like ultimately I think a lot of the criticism even of Galaxy's Edge are pretty fair with the idea of like, what are they trying to accomplish there? Like, why are they trying to turn what should effectively just be like Star Wars land into like this canonical incorporation of like people going to a theme park into things? Like, it has to be its own unique place that we can write a book about, instead of like, I don't think anyone really wants that. Can you not just have like a Star Wars land that is like, here's like original trilogy section over here, here's prequel section over here, here's sequel section over here, and you can have a mismatch of things. Like, it doesn't have to, why does the theme park have to remain canonical and all that sort of stuff? People just want a mishmash of stuff, and that like, if you had a Naboo starfighter right out there in the middle of the park, I think people would be just as interested in that as they would be like Rey's giant speeder bike thing from that movie. You know, that stuff works just as well. You know, again, like it's prequel stuff, but like imagine like a section of one of those theme parks being like Theed from Naboo, instead of like random Star Wars location number 2 that has a moisture evaporator out the front and stuff like that, and it's just typical Star Wars deserty area number 4 or whatever. Like you sort of see the problem and the idea, their approach. They're trying to make everything about like, we'll set it in sequel era time, and it means that like you can't have like all the characters people care about be around, but like only Rey and these characters can be around. It's like they're really trying to go in on the new stuff, and it's of course some people like it, but ultimately like your most hardcore fans, a lot of them haven't been as impressed, and it's just like, can you not just use the fact that you have Star Wars and all of it together? And it's almost like, how do they not see that, given that in the middle of all the hatred, what have been some of the shining lights in terms of popularity? It's been Clone Wars has always been something that I think a lot of people have said, amazing, Clone Wars is coming back, that's great. Whereas everything else I think has been a little bit, you know, maligned. Like what Resistance was basically just cancelled. Like, it got 2 seasons. Like, they didn't, it was like, what happened? Like, they said season 2 is coming out, it's also going to be the last season. So like, was it cancelled, was it not? But either way, the idea is that it wasn't popular. It didn't catch as many people's attention as it perhaps could have. And it just, it leaves Star Wars in this really weird position as it is right now, where I don't really think Disney quite knows what they want to do, what they need to do to get as many Star Wars fans as possible interested. In that, Episode 9 is ending the Skywalker saga. They're specifically choosing to take one of these movies, which, you know, they're putting a lot of faith in this thing to bring it to a nice conclusion. And then what are they doing after this? Like, we know there's other movies in the planning stages and stuff like that. So what is actually going to happen with them? Are they going to continue on from this? Are you going to set movies here or here? Like I said before, I think they should do Knights of the Old Republic or something like that. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a Origin of the Sith type thing, where the Rule of 2 came from. That to me is a story that needs to be told. That it shouldn't be, that is a story that shouldn't just be confined to that series of novels that most people will likely not read, especially now that they're not even at all canon anymore. They're in Legends now. The story like Darth Bane and stuff like that should, I think, be well known at this point, because in the grand scheme of things, like, if you just look at the movies, we know very little about the Sith, full stop, just based on the movies themselves. Even the prequels, which go sort of the most into like the ideas of like what the Sith are, you still don't fundamentally get that idea all that much. They tell you the Rule of 2 at the end of Episode 1, but nothing about like their history and stuff like that. Whereas from context, I think you get the history of the Jedi. And so I think going into the past to tell a story like that is something that would be worthwhile. Plus, it would allow you to tell a story that is sort of villain focused, which could be quite interesting as well. But yeah, that's just the update on Star Wars I wanted to do. I've kind of been wanting to talk about it for a while. So yeah, the reason I haven't done a lot of late is just because like I haven't been that excited for a lot of the more recent Star Wars stuff that has come out recently. There are 2 books that I have to get to. I still have to read the Dooku book that recently came out. The new Thrawn book I also haven't read. There are 2 I do want to read. But yeah, we're finally, I think, at a point where we're starting to get back on track here. In that Kenobi, Mandalorian, the Disney streaming series, I think, are going to be very interesting in regards to the future of Star Wars. They seem to be focusing more on, okay, let's try TV to do a lot of this expanded stuff rather than movies and see how that works. I think that will actually work well for them. So I think that's a positive. Them bringing back the Clone Wars is a good thing, and I think there will likely be a call for them to do more kind of prequel Clone Wars era style stuff, because that seems to sort of be the trend, the popular thing in a way, the thing that people want in the fandom at this point in time. Ahsoka is so popular. Kenobi, that announcement was so popular. You could sort of see, like, why don't we go back and like reference the prequels a lot more? And then Episode 9, I think they've kind of at least managed to sort of get people a little bit more interested in this. I think you've taken people from being just very like, no, I am done with the sequel trilogy, to kind of being like, okay, like you're hyping this up, it's going to end the full 9 movies. I'll at least let you try and impress me with this. And that, like, I was never not going to see this. I was never just going to like be like, oh, as a Star Wars fan, I will never have seen the last of the 9 movies. That's just a bit silly to me. But they still have a lot of work to do to kind of get me back on track. So I'm intrigued to see just how big they go. J.J. Abrams has a little bit of positive stuff left to spend with the fan base, because in general 7, while I think it's since sort of become known as sort of like the dull, sort of almost like boring movie, I don't think too many people have a lot to like heavily criticize about it. It's still the solid start to the sequel trilogy, and it's 8 that gets the more aggressive anger towards it. But it means that 9 has to do everything, because it has basically no support or setup from 8, in that 9, I think, is going to have to like really run over a lot of stuff that Episode 8 has done. It's going to have to like contradict stuff. It's going to have to take a different approach to how it handles the material and some of the characters and stuff like that. And then it's just going to have to do a lot of world building. If you want to suddenly bring Palpatine back in and bring a 9 movie arc full circle, when up until now you haven't really been too referential towards the previous movies, that's a lot of work to do. So I hope this movie is probably on the longer side of things, because it will need the time to do what it needs to do. But we'll see what they do. But yeah, that's been the video. It's just a quick discussion, a discussion on Star Wars that I've wanted to do for a while. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on some of the recent announcements, and where are you at when it comes to your excitement level going into Rise of Skywalker Episode 9? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.